All right, fam. Now for our feature story of the day. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink says Bitcoin can replace the US dollar as the world's reserve currency because of the national debt, as printed here in the headline on Fortune magazine, or news story here on obviously on the internet. But nonetheless, there's another one from Crypto Slate here. The headline reads, BlackRock's Larry Fink confirms Bitcoin can replace the US dollar as the global currency amid the rising US debt. And I watched the actual Larry Fink interview where he discusses this. So here's some of the highlights. BlackRock chairman and CEO Mr. Lawrence Fink officially recognized in his 2025 annual letter to shareholders that Bitcoin can challenge the US dollar status as the global reserve currency. That's right. The letter explicitly frames Bitcoin as both a disruptive innovation and a geopolitical risk should the U.S. government fail to rein in debt and deficits. Fink wrote the following in the March 2025 letter: if the U.S. doesn't get its debt under control, which we all know it's not going to, if deficits keep ballooning, which we all know it's going to, America risks losing that position to digital assets like Bitcoin, which we all know will happen. The comment marks a clear acknowledgement from the head of the world's largest asset manager. I dare say over 11 trillion in assets under management. So this could represent an alternative to the US dollar in global markets. Bitcoin for the takeover. That's right. Fink mentioned Bitcoin by name 7 times throughout the letter, while referencing the dollar 8 times. The significance of the parallel frequency in Fink's annual letter cannot be overstated. A few years back, who would have thunk that Bitcoin would have been something that you would have bought? And who would have thought Larry Fink would spend as much time talking about Bitcoin as the US dollar in the annual letter to investors? Sign of the time, broskies. The BlackRock letter outlines the split view that while DeFi is praised as an extraordinary innovation, the firm cautions that its growth could undermine America's financial primacy. The risk emerges if investors begin treating the biddy as a more stable long-term store of value than the US dollar, particularly given the ongoing federal deficits and sovereign debt levels. This framing positions the biddy as more than a speculative asset or store of value and as a macro hedge against sovereign instability. I repeat, it's a macro hedge against sovereign instability. The implications parallel similar arguments made in recent years by institutional investors, treating digital assets as insurance against monetary debasement or geopolitical volatility. And the first person I heard use that particular term was Kathy Wood of ARK Invest. She says something like Bitcoin is ultimately an insurance policy against inflation and deflation. And as Fink emphasized, 2 things can be true at the same time, referring to the coexistence of innovation and risk in digital asset development. Now, BlackRock's internal positioning on Bitcoin is not purely theoretical. The letter disclosed that its US-based Bitcoin ETF became the largest product launch in the history of the ETF industry, reaching over 50 billion in assets under management within the first year. It also ranked 3rd in net assets inflows across the ETF categories, behind only the S&P. Now, retail adoption was the key driver, with more than half of the demand for the firm's Bitcoin ETP coming from individual investors. Notably, 3/4 of those participants had never previously owned an iShares product. So Bitcoin attracted all that to the institutions, suggesting Bitcoin is acting as an onboarding mechanism for a new demographic of investors. Facts. The firm also expanded its ETP offerings, and ETPs are ultimately exchange-traded products such as the ETFs, in Canada and Europe, signaling cross-border growth and institutional-grade Bitcoin investment vehicles. Now, BlackRock's goal, from my understanding, is to tokenize the world. So the next section here, tokenization position as infrastructure evolution. Beyond Bitcoin, Fink's letter advanced a broader thesis that tokenization could transform capital markets in ways comparable to the shift of the postal mail to email. Drawing a comparison to the SWIFT network, Fink argued tokenized asset infrastructures could bypass traditional financial intermediaries by enabling instant peer-to-peer asset movement. Now, BlackRock sees tokenization as a foundational shift in asset ownership, mainly through fractionalization, improving voting systems, and increased access to high-yield investment instruments. Let me give you an example of a tokenization of real estate. So, for example, currently, typically one person owns a piece of real estate. What if they tokenize a piece of real estate, hypothetically speaking, in Manhattan? They put it on the blockchain, and now all of a sudden they could have, let's say, 1,000 or 10,000 investors all owning a piece of that one real estate. This is an example of tokenization in real world, play. And according to the letter, these developments could democratize capital markets by lowering the operational and legal barriers that have historically limited the retail investor participation into certain asset classes. The firm also emphasized the need for updated digital identity systems, citing India's model as a benchmark. And according to the letter, over 90% of Indians can securely verify smartphone transactions, positioning the country as a leader in the digital infrastructure necessary for the tokenized economies. The inclusion of Bitcoin as a potential replacement for the dollar reflects a material shift in institutional perception. While the mainstream recognition of Bitcoin as digital gold has grown in recent years, BlackRock's language points to a deeper economic thesis, one in which macroeconomic policy failure could accelerate a pivot to decentralized monetary systems, citing both tokenization and Bitcoin within the same strategic outlook. The letter presents a framework where digital assets are positive, systemic alternatives to the fiat monopoly tulip mania. And for policymakers, the message is implicit but pointed that the U.S. must modernize its financial systems to manage its debt trajectory to maintain its monetary leadership. And there you have it. And again, Larry Fink says Bitcoin could replace the dollar as a world reserve currency due to the national debt. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And again, welcome everyone to the Q&A segment of the live stream. I'll do my best to read your comments out loud. Feel free to ask anything you like. Shout out Laser Face. I appreciate the sub. Anyone who subscribes to the YouTube channel will get the on-screen shout out, and I'll shout you out and also strike the gong. So this one's for you, Laser.